Look on the affinity between music, dancing, and poetry. In the second part of this essay, I have mentioned the connection between the two arts of music and dancing formed by the rhythmus, as the ancients termed it, or as we call it, the tune or measure that equally regulates both. It is not, however, every sort of step, gesture, or motion of which the correspondence with the tune or measure of music will constitute a dance. It must be a step, gesture, or motion of a particular sort. In a good opera actor, not only the modulations and pauses of his voice, but every motion and gesture, every variation, either in the air or of his head or in the attitude of his body, correspond to the time and measure of music. The best opera actor, however, is not, according to the language of any country in Europe, understood to dance, yet in the performance of his part he generally makes use of what is called the stage step. But even this step is not understood to be a dancing step. Though the eye of the most ordinary spectator readily distinguishes between what is called a dancing step and any other step, gesture, or motion, yet it may not perhaps be very easy to express what it is which constitutes this distinction. To ascertain exactly the precise limits at which the one species begins and the other ends, or to give an accurate definition of this very frivolous matter, might perhaps require more thought and attention than the very small importance of the subject may seem to deserve. Were I, however, to attempt to do this, I should observe that though in performing any ordinary action, in walking, for example, from the one end of the room to the other, a person may show both grace and agility, yet if he betrays the least intention of showing either, he is sure of offending more or less, and we never fail to accuse him of some degree of vanity and affectation. In the performance of any such ordinary action, every person wishes to appear to be solely occupied about the proper purpose of the action. If he means to show either grace or agility, he is careful to conceal that meaning, and he is very seldom successful in doing so. He offends, however, just in proportion as he betrays it, and he almost always betrays it. In dancing, on the contrary, every person professes and avows, as it were, the intention of displaying some degree either of grace or of agility or of both. The display of one or other or both of these qualities is in reality the proper purpose of the action, and there can never be any disagreeable vanity or affection in following out the proper purpose of any action. When we say of any particular person that he gives himself many affected airs and graces in dancing, we mean either that he gives himself airs and graces which are unsuitable to the nature of the dance, or that he executes awkwardly, perhaps exaggerates too much, the most common fault in dancing, the airs and graces which are suitable to it. Every dance is in reality a succession of airs and graces of some kind or other, and of airs and graces which, if I may say so, profess themselves to be such. The steps, gestures, and motions which, as it were, avow the intention of exhibiting a succession of such airs and graces, are the steps, gestures, and motions which are peculiar to dancing, and when these are performed to the time and measure of music, they constitute what is properly called a dance. But though every sort of step, gesture, or motion, even though performed to the time and measure of music, will not alone make a dance, yet almost any sort of sound, provided it is repeated with the distinct rhythmus, or according to a distinct time and measure, though without any variation as to gravity or acuteness, will make a sort of music, no doubt indeed, an imperfect one. Drums, cymbals, and, so far as I have observed, all other instruments of percussion, have only one note. This note, however, when repeated with a certain rhythmus, or according to a certain time and measure, and sometimes, in order to mark more distinctly that time and measure, with some little variation as to loudness and lowness, though without any as to acuteness and gravity, does suddenly make a sort of music, which is frequently far from being disagreeable, and which even sometimes produces considerable effects. The simple note of such instruments, it is true, is generally a very clear, or what is called a melodious, sound. It does not, however, seem indispensably necessary that it should be so. The sound of the muffled drum, when it beats the dead march, is far from being either clear or melodious, and yet it certainly produces a species of music which is sometimes affecting. Even in the performance of the most humble of all artists, of the man who drums upon the table with his fingers, we may sometimes distinguish the measure, and perhaps a little of the humour, of some favourite song, and we must allow that even he makes some sort of music. Without a proper step and motion, the observation of tune alone will not make a dance. Time alone, without tune, will make some sort of music. That exact observation of tune, or of the proper intervals of gravity and acuteness, which constitutes the great beauty of all perfect music, constitutes likewise its great difficulty. The time or measure of a song are simple matters, which even a coarse and unpractised ear is capable of distinguishing and comprehending. But to distinguish and comprehend all the variations of the tune, and to conceive with precision the exact proportion of every note, is what the finest and most cultivated ear is frequently no more than capable of performing. In the singing of the common people we may generally remark a distinct enough observation of time, but a very imperfect one of tune. To discover and to distinguish with precision the proper intervals of tune must have been a work of long experience and much observation. In the theoretical treatises upon music, what the authors have to say upon time is commonly discussed in a single chapter of no great length or difficulty. The theory of tune fills commonly all the rest of the volume, and has not long ago become both an extensive and an abstruse science, which is often but imperfectly comprehended, even by intelligent artists. In the first rude efforts of uncivilized nations towards singing, the niceties of tune could be but little attended to. I have, upon this account, been frequently disposed to doubt of the great antiquity of those national songs, which it is pretended have been delivered down from age to age by a sort of oral tradition, without having been ever noted or distinctly recorded for many successive generations. The measure, the humor of the song, might perhaps have been delivered down in this manner, but it seems scarcely possible that the precise notes of the tune should have been so preserved. The method of singing some of what we reckon our old Scotch songs has undergone great alterations within the compass of my memory, and it may have undergone still greater before. The distinction between the sounds or tones of singing and those of speaking seems to be of the same kind with that between the steps, gestures, and motions of dancing and those of any other ordinary action. Though in speaking a person may show a very agreeable tone of voice, yet if he seems to intend to show it, if he appears to listen to the sound of his own voice, as it were to tune it into a pleasing modulation, he never fails to offend, as guilty of a most disagreeable affectation. In speaking, as in every other ordinary action, we expect and require that the speaker should attend only to the proper purpose of the action, the clear and distinct expression of what he has to say. In singing, on the contrary, every person professes the intention to please by the tone and cadence of his voice, and he not only appears to be guilty of no disagreeable affectation in doing so, but we expect and require that he should do so. To please by the choice and arrangement of agreeable sounds is the proper purpose of all music, vocal as well as instrumental, and we always expect and require that every person should attend to the proper purpose of whatever action he is performing. A person may appear to sing as well as to dance affectedly. He may endeavor to please by sounds and tones which are unsuitable to the nature of the song, or he may dwell too much on those which are suitable to it, or in some other way he may show an overweening conceit of his own abilities, beyond what seems to be warranted by his performance. The disagreeable affectation appears to consist always, not in attempting to please by a proper, but by some improper modulation of the voice. It was early discovered that the vibrations of chords or strings, which either in their lengths, or in their densities, or in their degrees of tension, bear a certain proportion to one another, produce sounds which correspond exactly, or, as the musicians say, are the unisons of those sounds or tones of the human voice which the ear approves of in singing. This discovery has enabled musicians to speak with distinctness and precision concerning the musical sounds or tones of the human voice. They can always precisely ascertain what are the particular sounds or tones which they mean, by ascertaining what are the proportions of the strings of which the vibrations produce the unisons of those sounds or tones. What are called the intervals, that is, the differences, in point of gravity and acuteness, between the sounds or tones of a singing voice, are much greater and more distinct than those of the speaking voice. Though the former, therefore, can be measured and appreciated by the proportions of chords or strings, the latter cannot. The nicest instruments cannot express the extreme minuteness of these intervals. The Heptamerid of Mr. Sauveur, Joseph Sauveur, though defective in speech and hearing, was virtually the founder of the science of musical acoustics, basing it on experimental and mathematical analysis of the frequency pitch relation and the harmonies derivative therefrom. His division of the octave into mérides was never widely adopted. He expounded it in a paper in Mémoires de l'Académie des Sciences. The octave was divided into 43 mérides, each of these into 7 heptamérides, and each of these into 10 décamérides. Donc, the heptamerid of Mr. Sauver could express an interval so small as the seventh part of what is called a comma, the smallest interval that is admitted in modern music. Yet even this instrument, we are informed by Mr. Duclos, Charles Pinot Duclos, makes this comment in the remark that he added to the Grammaire générale et raisonnée, and later, la prosodie doit se faire beaucoup sentir dans le chinois s'il est vrai que les différentes inflexions d'un même mot servent à exprimer des idées différentes. He cites Dionysius of Halicarnassus on the musical interval between a grave and an acute accent in Greek. Could not express the minuteness of the intervals in the pronunciation of the Chinese language. Of all the languages in the world, that of which the pronunciation is said to approach the nearest to singing, or in which the intervals are said to be the greatest. As the sounds or tones of the singing voice, therefore, can be ascertained or appropriated, while those of the speaking voice cannot. The former are capable of being noted or recorded, while the latter are not. J'ai fini. Adam Smith.